Hello, my name is Henk de Berg. I'm a professor at the University of Sheffield and the director of the Pockroff Centre. I'm here in Sheffield's Humanities Research Institute to interview Lionel Shriver. Lionel Shriver, welcome to the Pockroff Centre. I want to address two topics in this interview. One, identity politics, and two, the relation between literature and freedom of speech, the topic of your Pockroff Centre lecture yesterday. Let's start with identity politics. Recently you published an interview in The Spectator entitled, I quote, "Identity politics are by definition racist," unquote. What do you mean by identity politics and why do you think they are racist?
Well, it's a way of thinking of people and also a way of urging people to think about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all in terms of group membership, which in this way of thinking overrides everything about you. And I object to that in principle. And after all, that is racism. That is the nature of racism, that you blot out everything that is particular about a person, and all you see is the color of their skin. So to me, it's the same thing. It may be in the name of social justice, but it's still thinking in terms of category. And my general approach to all these membership issues is to try to get out of the box. And in relation to myself, for example, I may have been born female, but that's just an accident of birth. And I'm not necessarily going to walk around thinking of myself primarily as a human female. And I'm not going to necessarily believe that as a fiction writer and as a journalist that I have to mostly embrace feminist ideas. My interests are far wider. And I would say the same thing of having been born American. That also was an accident of birth. It's come with certain advantages, but also disadvantages. And after all, I've lived in the UK for over 30 years, so that makes me someone who has at least made an attempt to get out of that box. Okay, I was also born white. Again, some advantages, but it comes with some disadvantages.
So the idea being that racism or the discriminatory aspect is when you see in a person nothing else than his membership of a particular group or a particular race.
Yes.
In the past we said if you see in a black person only the black person, that's racist. But now we're doing it as part of sort of active identity politics that a lot of people are embracing, and it's just a form of perhaps not even inverse racism, but actual racism.
Oh, sure. I mean, if you say you can't say anything, you have no right to express yourself because you are a straight white male, and this is a movement, if you can call it that has quite specifically told that group of people, and it's a large group of people, that they have no right to say anything about anything. And I'm not willing to say that about any group of people.
Mm-hmm. In a different article in the Spectator, you also say that identity politics are emotionally disingenuous, and you say, I quote, "These people aren't frightened, they want you to be frightened of them." Can you elaborate on that?
It's a very predatory movement. I mean, it incentivizes a modern day version of hunting. And it seems to take a lot of collective pleasure in taking people down, ruining careers. It's rife with accusation. And one of the things that's odd to me about the social media version of this is that the targets tend to be people who are ideologically right next door. That is, not real racists and not white supremacists. I mean, after all, if you accuse a real white supremacist, and there is such a thing, of being a white supremacist, they say, "You betcha." I mean, they're proud of it. They truly believe that the white race is superior. So, but no, those are not those people are not fun to hunt for. That's kind of cheating. You have to go for people who actually like to think of themselves as fair-minded and tolerant, and those are the people you can take down.
So people who are kind of in your own camp, but who might have more power than you.
Yes.
Do you see this as a form of what Nietzsche, the philosopher Nietzsche, called slave morality or Sklavenmoral? So for our viewers, slave morality in Nietzsche's sense has got less to do with colonialism and imperialism, but much more with philosophical discussions coming out of Hegel's discussion of the dialectical relationship between lordship and bondage. And in works such as On the Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche says, and I'm stressing this is what Nietzsche is saying, it's not what I'm saying, Nietzsche says that morality is less a sort of an intersubjective system of values that is really about justice, but morality is about ways in which a minority group can transform its powerlessness into power and in a sense getting its own back on the dominant group. Is that kind of the dynamics you see at work here, that sometimes it's less about justice, social justice, but more about a power dynamics within the liberal camp?
Yes, I think that's well said. There's definitely a generational element going on that young people are being incentivized to take down people my age and your age.
My age.
And so that there's a kind of move to replace the older generation. And my general view is, look, we're going to go pretty soon anyway. Just hold your horses. You will take over the world. That's the way it works, right? So you just have to be a little patient. And this is more, in its impatience, an insistence on pushing the program and knocking people out, so that it's essentially a hostile relationship
but also
to the older
in terms
generation.
of social justice, it's actually arguably a step. It's to step back. You write in another article, I quote, "Progress to me involves all of us becoming so what about race, but that's not the direction we're headed," unquote. So the famous speech that Martin Luther King gave, 28th of August 1963, the famous March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. "I have a dream that my children will once live in a nation where where they will be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin." We seem to be going in the opposite direction, because we're constantly judging people by the color of their skin. You can't say this because you're white, you're not entitled to this because, and so on. So why this social retrenchment? It's very strange if you look at what human beings actually are. I'm going to throw another philosopher at you, but then I am a cultural theorist. Jean-Paul Sartre famously said, if you compare on the one hand stones and plants and animals and human beings on the other hand, what is typical about human beings is that they have choices. They have the capacity for moral choice. They can shape their own destinies. And Sartre famously talks about le choix que je suis, the choice that I am. I can shape my destiny by my choices. But now we seem to be saying culture is destiny. That's very strange and a step back, isn't it?
It's entirely regressive, and it's fatalistic. So it means that whatever class, race, nationality, ethnicity, gender you were born into, that is your fate. And so if you happen to be born as a straight white male, your fate is sealed. You're over. You don't have a future. You are no longer pertinent to the present moment. And that's just, it's not fair and it's not interesting.
But it also works two ways. I mean, if white people can't really understand black people, then of course at some point white people are going to claim that black people can't really understand them. So it is a renaissance of racism, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And I cannot remember any time since the civil rights movement in the 60s that we talk about race more And I know that there's a lot of baggage to sort through, and I'm not naive about the fact that we still have trouble with prejudice. But I am dismayed by the utter obsession and thinking of everything in terms of race, and more generally thinking of everything in terms of social hierarchy. And there are other things to talk about. There are other issues in the world besides who's on top. And of course it's important. Of course power relationships are important. Of course they help to explain how certain things happen. But it's not the whole world. When we were walking here, we were talking about architecture. And on a purely amateur level, I'm interested in architecture. It doesn't really have to do with power. It's aesthetics and decisions about what people look at in the future. I want to be able to have that conversation and many, many other conversations. And there's something about the nature of this conversation. It's as if that's all there is in the world. And that's why I don't like the reductive approach to literature now in a lot of university English departments.
We'll come on to literature in a moment, in the second part of our interview. Where does this narrow focus come from? I mean, is it that people now in the era of globalization and automation are looking again for some sort of firm ground under their feet? You've got this famous sentence in the Communist Manifesto really aimed at globalization, saying all that is solid melts into air. So you see some parts of the right trying to find firm ground again by going back to the nation and nationalism, but some parts of the left seems to be going back to culture, and then again culture as destiny, also to find some sort of firm ground, because the color of your skin is a given. It's nothing to do with the challenging choice you have to make. Do you think it comes from that desire to find some form of stability or pseudo stability in a world that is changing so rapidly?
I do think that identity politics seems to offer a group of people an identity, right? What's been pilloried as the social justice warrior. But yes, it seems to offer people a sense of solidarity with like-minded people, and it is itself an identity, that you're the one who cares about the vulnerable. I get so tired of that word. Which little by little seems to extend to everyone. You are filled with the fires of righteousness, and you're surrounded by these either thick people or social dinosaurs, and you're on this mission, and it's actually offering a kind of religious identity, because it provides a crusade, and there's nothing wrong with social justice, but I don't think that's what it's about. I think that the crusade for social justice becomes what is actually a kind of egotistical project, and also a clinging to an understanding of who you are. And that, you said a little earlier, and we didn't pursue it, one of the problems with this way of thinking is that you find your power through weakness, right? So that there's a competition between groups as to who has it worse, because anyone who has it worse has more power, because they get more pity, they are given more fires of righteousness and more indignation. And I am not big on locating power in weakness. And I've criticized the Me Too movement for this, that it's offering women too much to say, everyone needs to have their story of abuse in order to participate in this conversation. You have to have been afflicted in some way. And you locate the importance of yourself in the world by how badly you've been treated. Yeah. And I think this is a losing formula. I don't think that it's advice for a happy life. And ultimately you want to locate your power in competence, in excellence, in joy and ability, you know, positive things, rather than self-pity.
I want to come back to a point you made earlier, which is that we've made enormous progress when it comes to race relations. Not enough progress, but if you look at the last few decades, enormous progress. But then that also seems to trigger what the German philosopher Odo Marquardt has called the princess and the pea syndrome. In other words, the fewer social ills there are, the more unbearable the remaining ones become. Is that at play here as well?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think that the very fact that the term microaggression has been coined is a princess and the pea phenomenon. It suggests that the actual aggressions are hard to find, and you're reduced to looking for the little ones. And in some ways, it's a good sign, I guess, that that the big injustices are at least in the process of being righted, and we're left with the little shit, you know, the slight misusage of a word, or
but then isn't there also a danger that precisely because there's still real problems, real challenges, that there is still actual bodily harm and black people still get shot by the police and all the rest of it, that if we keep talking about, with the emphasis that we have until now, we keep talking about someone using a wrong word or a slightly infelicitous phrase, then that becomes the focus. But then the focus is shifting away from instances of systemic racism that still seem to be present in the police, for example. So isn't there actually a danger to, so it's not just we're focusing on stuff that perhaps isn't all that important, but also we're shifting away from stuff that is important and that is still wrong and that still needs to be addressed, but we're kind of have taken our eyes off the ball.
I entirely agree. And that, and it on a PR level, it backfires, and it makes the whole thing look petty and silly and hugely about language, right? Whereas there are some real injustices in the world. And if you, for example, the incarceration rate in the United States of black people, and the fact that that is caused by drug laws which approach drug problems as a criminal rather than a medical problem, and unjustly and appallingly incarcerate huge numbers of mostly black men. That's not gone away. That's real, and you know, it gets very little discussed. I mean, I'm glad to see some liberalization of marijuana laws in the U.S., and that's making some progress. But you know, we're still dealing with a huge prison population. Also, you know, a prison population which is disproportionately mentally ill. So we've criminalized mental illness, especially among the minority populations. These are the things we should be talking about, and these are not microaggressions.
Okay, let's take a short break here before we move on to the second part of our interview.
Okay.